Thank you, Chairman and Committee. My name is Shiva Rajbhandari. I'm 18 years old. I've served as a chief judge in Ada County elections 4 times, and I voted for the first time in a statewide election last November. I'm also one of the leaders of Babe Vote, a nonprofit, nonpartisan voter advocacy organization, and I'm speaking today in opposition to House Bill 54. I believe that all Idaho citizens deserve to make their voice heard at the ballot box. This bill would make it so that some people cannot vote. When the honorable representative introduced this legislation, she said that Oregonians were crossing the border to vote in Idaho elections. Mr. Chairman and Committee, that's not true. There's no widespread voter fraud in Idaho. Very rarely there are isolated incidents. When that happens, we have redundancies in place so that we catch it every single time. The lie that people are voting fraudulently in our state is dangerous and is a threat to the legitimacy of every single legislator in this building. I also want to call your attention to another inaccuracy in the bill, and that's the fiscal impact. If we made it so that people without IDs can't vote, we'd need to provide everyone with a free ID. Currently, the cheapest state-issued ID, as May said, is $10. Hence, this bill would violate the 24th Amendment, and that's several $1 million in court fees, plus the cost of providing free, real IDs to every Idaho citizen. Finally, I want to address the point that less than 100 people voted with their student ID last year. Here's the deal. In 2020, we saw the biggest turnout ever in Idaho's elections. That year, still, 203,809 registered voters didn't vote, and an additional about 200,000 people who were eligible weren't registered to vote, so they didn't vote as well. When making policies about how people can vote, this body cannot just consider the people who do vote. You have a duty to ensure that everyone who is eligible is able to vote, and there are an awful lot of people whose only government-issued photo ID is their student ID, so making it especially hard for those people to vote is unconstitutional and unethical. For those reasons, this legislation is poorly written, and I urge you to please vote no. I'll stand for any questions about our voting system or how this legislation adversely affects young folks.
Thank you, Shiva. Are there questions for Shiva? Representative Barbieri.
Shiva?
Shiva.
Shiva. When I was in high school, I was taught that Russia required everyone to vote. Are you advocating that we have some requirement that everyone should vote?
Shiva?
Certainly not. I think that everybody who is eligible should be able to vote. And so when we just consider the people who do vote, considering that our voter turnout is, less than 60% in most elections, we're forgetting that 40% of people who aren't voting but still have that right to vote. And I think, the point about student IDs being different in every school is a good point. But that's something the committee can consider to strengthen the validity of student IDs, right? We can put date of birth on student IDs. That'd be a great bill. But I think banning student IDs outright as a form of ID disenfranchises a lot of folks and spreads the wrong message that our elections aren't secure when in fact they are. Student IDs are taken for I-9s. They're taken for W-2s. So the federal government you're allowed to use student IDs, and I don't see why we want to invalidate that here in the state. The thing is that we have a voter registry, right? You have to register to vote. And so it's not like random people are coming in and voting with their student ID. These are people who live in the neighborhood, right? Precincts are groups of, 2,000 voters, and they're in the poll book. And as a poll worker, when you go in and you look up someone's student ID, they provide you the student ID, you would go and you look up their name, and it comes up. And typically, there's just one person. If it's a common name, John Smith, sure, maybe there's 5 people, but only one of them is 18, you can very easily verify that that person is who they say they are. If someone else comes in and then says that they're that exact same person, then right there that there's voter fraud being committed. One of them is lying, right? And because we know, because we can check that every time, we know that there is not voter fraud being committed because we're not having that problem, right? We're not having people vote with one ID and then have someone else come in and say they're the same person, because we would know if that happened. Same thing with when we do our post-election audits, we check, did someone die 2 days before the election and then vote? Well, then we know that there's voter fraud committed. And guess what? It didn't happen. That's not something that we're seeing in our state. That's not something that we're seeing across the country. And so the sense that our elections are insecure, it is flawed.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, yes. So I'll give you another opportunity to continue your pontification. So you're suggesting
Up.
Pontification.
I think he's able to speak his mind, and that's what we're doing.
It's not pontification. He was answering your question.
Well,
now,
okay.
did he get very verbose like some of us do as political
Absolutely.
leaders? Yeah,
he's learning.
He's good with words just like we are, so you're
He's
fine.
learning.
You continue
Mr.
on.
Chairman, if I might. So I'm hearing you suggest that it's absolutely impossible for fraud to be committed in our voters.
I'm not suggesting that, no.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman, Representative Barbieri, there are isolated incidents of voter fraud. One vote, maybe, in an election once every 20 years. Secretary of State's here, you could ask him about that. Every time that happens, we catch it. And in statute, there are provisions that make that a felony, right? You do go to jail when you commit voter fraud. The people who are impacted by this bill are going to be students whose only form of government-issued ID is student ID. And that's why it's so important to allow them to vote.